Thank you for joining us. I'm Michael Mill. I'm here with Robert Ascencio. Robert, thank you very much for being here.
Michael, thank you for always having me. I'm always excited to come in here and speak with you.
All right, so a couple things. One, you used to be a policeman with the Miami-Dade County, Miami-Dade Public Schools.
Schools police.
School police, for how many years?
26.
That's a long time.
Yeah.
All right. So when you went to do that, how did you decide to go to that department versus a county or a city or a village?
Actually, I was exiting my service in the military, right, in my reserve status, and there was a person who worked for me. He was a major at the time for the Miami-Dade Police Department, and he recommended to go to the school police at the time. I school police, what's that, right? All those security guards, and no, this is a small agency, but it's an emerging agency. He had a vision that the school's system would grow their police department over years. So he said, go there because I know you'll be able to excel there. If you come to the Miami-Dade Police Department or another agency, then it's going to take you a while longer.
So at the school board, how many police were in that department?
When I started?
When you started?
In 89, there was about 43 officers.
43 total. Yes. That's like the size of like a small city.
That is correct.
And how many are there now approximately?
I believe about 500.
Yes, yes. And it's just like incredible. So does that mean that there are just more policemen per school, or there are a lot more schools, or why did that happen like that?
Well, two things, or several things, right? Obviously, growth occurred in the district, Miami-Dade County Public Schools district. It's about the fourth largest in the country. Some will say at times it is the third largest school district in the country. From roughly 1989 to 2025, they brought on how many more schools? Be a couple hundred, maybe probably like 100. So we also have the phenomena of school shootings, and school safety has become a mainstream topic in American society. So the evolution has been, let's put an officer in the school to keep the schools safe.
And you brought up a good point, which is about school shootings. What is so attractive to these people that are ill that they want to go to a school and shoot people versus go to somewhere else? I won't mention somewhere else. What is it that's so enticing to them?
Well, they're soft targets, meaning that they're not heavily fortified. We don't build our schools as jails. For difficult access, there are plenty of access, and people know that. But I believe it boils back down to something even more simpler than that. It's an area of high population that will produce the highest amount of injury count, or death count. And these people that are intent on causing these, shootings, these mass casualty events, would go to these crowded places. I think the schools have become a symbol of, unfortunately, hunting ground for those that are sick and want to make a mark.
About a year or two ago, there's this young man, I don't know, 16 to 18. He received the weapon as a gift from his parents. And when you look at that boy, as deranged as he was, I'm going to go take this weapon and I'm going to go kill those people and ruin so many lives. And at some point, the parents were also charged. It might have been that case. What's your thought about that?
Well, going back to the Georgia, right? The school shooting in Georgia, where the child's name was Colt Gray. The assailant, he was 13, and I believe his parents had given him a high-powered rifle. Man, I think each incident has to be looked at as an individual incident, so you can break down and do the anatomy of what drove that person. But I'm perplexed as to why they continue to occur and why we're not able to stop them before they occur. Because every one of these assailants, every one of these subjects who commits these mass casualty incidents, they're flags. Beforehand, there were signs. How do we miss them?
So you bring up a good point. There was one a young man that the police have been to his house many times. And the question is, how far can they go? And they suspect that he's got a problem. And then if they can Baker Act him, for instance, That's good for a couple days.
Mm.
So
Usually 72 hours.
and you go, all right, so they behave and they're out. So, but let's talk about the stress on the officers when they go. And they go, is this going to be a future murderer or an assassin, or is he just or is just a kid having a bad day? So I'm sure you've done that when you would go out to school and you'd see the 14-year-old boy out there causing some grief. Let's talk about the process of that, and also the stress that it causes that you if you were doing the right thing or the best thing.
Sure. I mean, let's face it. We all have this natural sentiment towards children. They're kids, right? We don't want to believe that they're the worst. Just like you see an older person, you think, oh, that's a nice person. But we're not taking into account that each one of them are individuals, right? And there's some people that are actually broken. I want to go back to something before I continue on this answer. You mentioned to me about the parents being charged in the previous question. I think the parents should be charged wholeheartedly because they are responsible, especially when they provide the child a weapon. But the weapon, it's not just a firearm. It could be a knife. It could be, a vehicle. So, but the parents are supposed to be the guardians of those kids. And I know that there's no playbook. There's no instruction manual for raising kids. But damn it, as a parent, you should be more aware of what your kid's doing, what they're involved in, and you're responsible for them.
There's some cultures within families that the guns are more acceptable. And then other families like mine, I don't want a gun anywhere near me. So can those parents say, well, no, we grew up with guns. My grandparents, we always had guns. We're hunters. And so it seems to me they'd be a little bit more lax on that. And then subsequently we have that problem.
Well, a lot of people get caught up on the debate of guns versus no guns, right? The Second Amendment. Look, that's part of our American fabric, right? Guns in our culture, cowboys and Indians, or just taming of the West, if you will, right? We are a gun culture. But what we don't, I guess what we're failing is we're getting caught up in that debate. Should we take a right away from somebody from owning a firearm? What we should be talking about is sensible gun rules, right? Sensible common sense laws. And let's face it, we should be very hard on our parents that neglect their children, right? A lot of parents send their kids to school, daycare, right? And they expect somebody else to take care of them. You asked me about the question before was, how does it weigh on an officer when you're going to make an arrest, when you're investigating a child, somebody under the age of 18, right? That's committed, better yet, that's accused of committing a crime or a violation of law. Yeah, it weighs heavy on you because you know that if you're a conscious, experienced officer, seasoned officer, you should be aware that your actions will impact that kid's life. So you have to be very deliberate and you have to be very methodical in investigating these cases with kids. Look, I'm a big proponent for school safety, but I think where the school district, and I will always advocate for this, where they need to push on is they need to push to support and fund continuous training for those officers. It's not good enough just to put an officer in a school, right? You have to make sure that they're continuously trained and in an environment where you have limited funds, limited staffing, one officer per school. And every time that officer's out of a school, or every time they go to training, they have to be out of the school, right? But you need to continue to train them. That is an issue that the police departments are facing right now, not just school police, but police departments across the country.
Along that line, it's also the ability to say, I think this kid's got a problem. I'm seeing something with that, and we need to figure out what to do before he does something.
Takes a team.
Yeah.
It's not just an officer. It takes a team.
So 20 years ago, I was pulling into a parking lot to drop off some mail in the blue boxes. And as I pull in, I see these three kids on the side of the street run, one behind me, one between the mailboxes, and then one on the exit.
What was that?
So I was about to drop off, so I roll up my window. They ran one between the mailboxes to get me and then stood so I couldn't get out. And so I said, oh, I'm about to get robbed here. So I wasn't, but I called the police and I said, Michael, how do you know they were going to rob you? I said, well, it looked like that.
Mm.
I said, I just want you to know. And then you realize, at what point does the policeman say, listen, I'm seeing this. I see that there's a problem. And so what? And so, of course, they have the attorneys that are on the other side. Hey, he didn't do anything.
Yeah. He's
So-
a kid.
Yes.
Yeah, I would say that the majority of our children are not criminals, right? Obviously, right? But kids do dumb things, right? Things that we as adults probably would say they shouldn't do. So often we do, but they shouldn't do, right? Developmentally, ability to understand the consequences takes people longer. It takes maturity, right, to get there. So there's some kids that are going to act inappropriately, and they're going to act in a threatening manner, but they're not threatening you. They're just acting out. It's being able to identify the signs of those that are going to commit the crimes, right? And then getting that right. It's like threading a needle, man. It's difficult. I tell you, I know of children that committed some heinous crimes, like the kid at Southwood some years back, Hernandez, stabbed a student in the bathroom behind Goff, right? But I would say that there's a ton of others, and I mean a ton of others, who have done some really threatening things, but they haven't done it with malice. So therein lies the reason why I say you need continuous training, continuous understanding. You need a team of people to be assessing our children. We have to care for our children.
So it's not just that at some particular point they grab a gun, right? So sometimes there might be a whole series of things where the child's acting out all the time, and then of course the parents are denying it or not seeing it. But let's move on to the mental health of first responders, in particular with police and firemen and sometimes teachers. All right. We know a couple of years ago the director of the Miami-Dade Police Department attempted suicide.
Freddie.
Right.
We started a show right before
Yes.
that happened.
And when you think about that, here's this visually, you look at him, strong, muscular guy, very assertive, and it was like everything seemed to be good. So sometimes when we look at people, we got the wrong thing, right? We're just judging on how they look, not necessarily what is inside. So it takes a lot of training. But let's talk in particular with the school board when you were on there with the police. Tell us about the training that you received, because most of the people were teachers, I guess, and the kids. So how was your training there?
Again, it was an evolutionary process, right? At first, we were just considered school safety. We're police officers sworn by the state of Florida, but hey, they didn't see us internally in the district. They did not really see us as police. So the training was minimal, right? And we had to fight to what they have today to be able to be accredited as an agency under CALEA police standards, national police standards, police standards. We also had to ensure that we bargained for additional training hours. And then obviously the state has evolved because the mandate, we're governed by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. All law enforcement who are certified in the state of Florida are governed by Florida Department of Law Enforcement Training and Standards Division, and they have over the years required more training of officers. But let me tell you, in an environment like the school police, and I know that now they have a show here, kudos to them, kudos to you for recognizing that. It's a good community move. But I will challenge you to push them to always advocate for continuous and added training, because as society changes and issues become more and more complex, people's lives become more and more evolved, so do the officers' recognition ability, so do the officers' capability, so do the officers' qualifications have to increase.
Years ago, when phones started getting pretty popular, we would frequently hear the police say, "Oh, I thought he had a gun," and it was a phone. I haven't heard that much recently, but that took a lot of training to be able to do that, to spot the difference. And you might remember years ago in North Miami Beach, there was a caretaker, and I think the young man was autistic, I think.
That is correct.
And he
caretaker was shot.
And the autistic, he was shot, right? Did he die?
Yeah, no, he did not. I believe he had a toy truck.
And so you look at it, And for people that are not in law enforcement, you know, you look at that and you go, it must be a gun because that's that fear factor. But let's talk about when you were in a high tense, you know, situation. Tell us about your heart rate and your blood pressure and the endorphins and the adrenaline that all going, and you see it's a bad situation. So tell us about how you were able to control that.
Yeah, man. So you asked that question again earlier about weighing on the officer. I tell you, it weighs on them immensely. 87 days on the job. So came on with the school police. I was in my field training officer bays, and they're usually 90 days. First couple of days of the department hire, you're doing in processing, then you go on the road for 90 days. Well, 87 days of being on the road. My partner and I, my then partner and I, my field training officer and I, came across somebody shooting at police, shot at us, and there was a shootout, right? So the first less than 90 days on the job, I'm involved in my first shootout. I have to say that at the scene, I remember smelling the gun smoke. I remember seeing the muzzle flash. The guy was shooting it turns out he was shooting a 32 caliber firearm, very, very small caliber. And when he pointed the thing at us, and he was right in front of our vehicle, in front of our hood, I thought that was a cannon going off. I remember the guy's eyes. I remember what color shoes. 1990.
So here's a lifetime ago, and it's still fresh.
Yes. I remember what color socks he was wearing. And as he was running down the street and we were taking action, disappears. I remember giving the entire description of what the guy was doing and where we lost him. Point being, back then, the biggest emphasis on our department was, when am I going to clear the scene? When am I going to get back to the station to turn in that vehicle to come back to work the next day? Nowadays, the philosophy has changed, the mindset has changed, the culture's changed. You provide the officers relief. You get them off the job. You follow and care for them and monitor, right, their well-being. But I'll tell you what, no matter how much monitoring there is, there's a little piece that always stays with you, and it messes with you, right? It takes a strong individual to fight those. And you think about it, day after day, year after year, compounded trauma that these officers, the first responders, and people out there in public.
So this is over 30 years ago, and it's alive and well in you. So anyway, we're going to wrap it up. I'd like to continue the conversation in a week or so we can talk about that. So because people need to understand themselves when traumatic events occur, that gets seared into our brain. And then we each have to be able to recognize it. And a lot of people down here went through Hurricane Andrew, certainly not what you went through. That doesn't mean the emotional impact wasn't the same.
It can be even worse than what an officer does.
Yeah.
No one is immune from trauma. And that's the point. That's why we're doing Bets and Badges, right? Thank you.
Yes.
We're doing that.
Your regular show.
Yes.
Right? And you do it with David, right? Former police
and many other stakeholders.
And so I think that's important so that we can all have some empathy towards that and understand just because they don't look a certain way or they look a certain way doesn't mean they're not traumatized or not traumatized.
It's all about understanding what the other person's going through.
Robert, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank
and
you.
we're going to look in the red camera over here. All right. And listen, folks, remember, take care of yourselves and your family. Have a good day. Thanks for joining us.